Welcome to How to Play Naval. This guide assumes that you don't understand any of the basics of how to play the game mode. However, if you do, you'll still probably get at least something out of it, unless you're already a relatively established naval player, in which case you probably don't need this. The first thing that I want to go over is keybinds. Like most modes, you need to have a few things bound. You don't need to care too much about things like controlling the main engine and steering, which is roughly the same as ground. The halt button simply immediately takes you to stop as fast as possible. This still isn't instantaneous, you're in a boat, but it'll be quick. Firing is important, all that's important. Your ranging shot, I would bind, but I don't think you're going to use it all that often unless you're in very specific scenarios. The things that are going to be the most important for you are understanding how to lock a target, which is in common. For me, this is middle mouse button. You can pick whatever you want. The other thing you want bound is distance correction. I would advise binding this to your mouse wheel, both up and down, to increase and decrease value. You can also set a dead zone and relative control sensitivities. Now, let's look at the basics of how to aim in Naval. Okay, now, in a game, when you've locked a target, it will then first measure the range and then update the range. Now, you will see this number at the bottom of the target that will tell you its approximate range from you. Even with maxed out rangefinders, this is generally not particularly accurate. If you're in a ship with a very fast fire rate, like a light cruiser or a destroyer, it's perfectly acceptable to simply aim roughly 0.2 kilometers under where this is, so for me that would be about here, and fire. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have a fast fire rate, it works. But as you get up to the higher tiers, you'll unlock battleships, and these things have usually around a 30-second reload. So you want to make sure that your shots are counting. Well, let's think. First off, where do you want to hit this target? Well, for most ships, it's different, and it does take a little bit of a learning curve, much like with tanks, to figure out exactly where you're going to be at the strongest to deal the most damage. Against this ship in particular, which is an Admiral Hipper class German heavy cruiser, you want to hit underneath the A or B turret right here. So, what we're going to do is zoom in and look using this green pipper as it goes over the target. As you can see, when I drag, the pipper moves. We want to place this at the waterline and then a little under to make sure we hit the ammo. So, here's the pipper. We drag it down until it hits the waterline, which we see is at about 9 kilometers distance. We're then going to drag under it to about 9.3, 9.2, and fire our guns. At this distance, they take a few seconds to splash, but when they do, we should see some relatively strong hits here. And the target is destroyed. In this case, the target was destroyed because I first hit its ammo elevator, and then the rounds went into its primary ammo stowage. This is in a different location on each ship. For my own ship, the USS Nevada, you can see we have ammo stowage below both sets of turrets. Either of these will deal extreme damage to me, and if they are properly detonated, could easily destroy my ship. It's not a guaranteed immediate destruction, as ships have ways of dealing with this. Things like ammo wetting, proper ventilation, and fire extinguishing will drastically help you in avoiding dying the second your ammo is detonated. However, depending on the health of the ship, and depending on the specific type of ship, it's very common that you will be able to immediately kill them by hitting them in the ammo. In this example, I've been hit by an enemy cruiser. I have a fire started on my ship. I also am beginning to sink. Now, it's very important to understand the order in which you deal with these things. The first thing you want to do in any scenario where you have all three types of damage like this is begin fire starting. The reason for this is that if the fire spreads to your shell room, your ship will detonate. So, your number one priority is always fire. If you activate multiple things at the same time, you'll see they increase the amount of time each one takes. And then they're back to normal. Once your fire is out, usually the next thing you should prioritize is flooding. First, it will repair, and then it will unwater. The repairing can be extended by the enemy. The unwatering will be extended as you sink further. Finally, the last thing you should do in any scenario is repair your ship. Let's revisit aiming one more time. If I target the ship by hitting middle mouse button, you can see what distance he's at and roughly how fast he's moving. Once the range measuring is finished, up in the top left here, you can see I will get a lot of information about him. First off, a red mark will appear where he is in relative distance to my ship. I will also see his current heading, his heading angle, and his target speed. Most of the time, you don't have to worry about these too much, but they can be important. Now, if I look at his ship, you can see I get this caret that tells me roughly where he is. This is going to be based off of the distance and the speed of your ship alongside his. Because we are moving away from each other at a decent speed, it's going to require a little bit of lead. This caret is placed in the center of his ship. Now, if I want to kill a USS Des Moines like this one, I'm going to aim slightly in front, and since he's moving away from me instead of towards me, I'm going to aim a little bit farther than necessary. So, I'm going to find out where his waterline is, aim above that waterline by a bit, and aim above where the center of his ship is because I want to hit that B-turn. Then, I'll send a salvo, and if I've aimed correctly, the salvo will deal a significant amount of damage. In this scenario, because he's moving away and he's at a relatively bad angle for me like this, you can see it didn't do quite as much as I wanted. Generally, it's much easier to kill a target that's moving parallel or potentially perpendicular to you, because you're able to get a better gauge on the waterline. Targets moving towards you are also generally more favorable than targets moving away from you. Why is that? Well, because it's easier to aim a little bit too low than it is to aim a little bit too high. If you're too high, like in this example, you might take out their ammo elevator, but not deal any damage to their shell room underneath. Whereas if you aim too low, you've got a higher chance of actually getting the shell room. Here, in this example, if I want to fire at this cruiser, I'm typically going to go for the rear elevator and rear ammo storage, even though it's a little funkier, purely because I think I've got a better chance of actually hitting what I want. And once again, we'll take the shot, and this time we will hit his rear a little bit too low. But, as you can see, we're hitting relatively consistent shots. The most important thing to consider when aiming is always your position. If you look at me here, I could be potentially getting better shots on him if I chose to angle myself so that all 4 of my guns got a hit. However, I also want to be careful. In a real naval match, there might be enemies off my bow, and I want to make sure that they can't hit me broadside because it would give them an easier shot to kill my ship. So, by angling like this, I present a very small area for them to hit, and even if they do hit it, they're hitting at an angle where their shells will have less penetrative power. One final tip that I want to give for general naval gameplay, because I think I've covered most of the stuff to do with damage and aiming, is you want to always look at how the objectives play out. Naval has normal cap zones like you would see in ground, but it also has maps like this. On this kind of map, where you see this large circle, what matters is who's in it. It's not like King of the Hill where you capture the circle. You capture the circle a little more for your team based on the number of people you have in the center in relative numbers to your opponent. If your opponent has 5 enemy ships in the center and you have 3, they will have a little bit of capture progress. The amount of capture progress you have, based on the number of ships each team has, will cause one team to lose points. In general, my advice is simply stay partially within the circle. Going right into the center can be a death trap, but if you stay outside the circle, the game could end early, resulting in less rewards for you and relatively disappointed teammates at the loss.